Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much. I am really just so happy to be here.
So I'm really excited to have you because you describe yourself in a very unique way. I don't think I've ever heard an entrepreneur describe themselves like this, and you wear it kind of a badge of honor, which I love as well. You say you're a highly sensitive entrepreneur. I would love for you to tell the audience what you mean by that, because my feeling is there's some people who are going to resonate with that and go, hey, that might be me.
Yes, absolutely. So first of all, the phrase highly sensitive is not something coined by me, but actually comes from Dr. Elaine Aron, who is a psychologist and founding researcher on the highly sensitive person. This is work that she started in the early 1990s. And through her research, she has determined that there are 20% of us who are born into the world highly sensitive. So what that means is that if you're highly sensitive, your nervous system is wired to take in stimulation at a much higher degree than someone who is not highly sensitive. And that can be with sight, sound, smell, touch, energy, information, you name it. And so the work that I do then builds upon Dr. Aron's work and really is developed and designed to support those of us who are highly sensitive and also feel called to be an entrepreneur. And I'm sure you know yourself, Jay, but being an entrepreneur can be extremely overwhelming. So for a person who's highly sensitive, the world in general can be an experience of overwhelm because of that high degree of stimulation. And then you add on top of it being an entrepreneur. So the trainings, teaching tools that I've developed are all to support those of us who are highly sensitive to be able to be successfully self-employed. And that's a highly sensitive entrepreneur.
Awesome. So it's just interesting because I think some people might hear that term highly sensitive and think that's a weakness. That's not something I want to tell somebody about. That's not something I want to bring up. And yet have it like as a headline of as founder and leader of the highly sensitive entrepreneur movement since 2010. So that's almost a decade. What kind of revelations, what kind of feedback have you gotten from people about using that term? Like when people hear it, what's their reaction?
Yes. Well, there's an absolute resonance, 99.9% of the time for those who are highly sensitive. But I'll also share that I came to being the founder and leader of the highly sensitive entrepreneur movement really from my own experience. When I first started my self-employment journey, which was about 16 years ago now, I had no idea that I was highly sensitive. And it was a really dark night of the soul that brought me to understand that I was highly sensitive. I had brought my business across the $1 million mark for the first time and would love to say that it was like an amazing experience, but it was not. It was absolutely an experience of massive overwhelm, over-exhaustion, and overwork. And so I really started to question, what am I doing? And is this what I'm meant to be doing? Because if this is what it means to be successful, then I'm not really sure this is what I want to do. And if I don't want to do this, and what, those kinds of questions. So I really went into a space of deep inquiry. And that is what led me to Dr. Aron and to understanding that I was highly sensitive. And I share this story because you mentioned the aspect of weakness. Now, one of the things that I've always taught in my work is that your ideal client is a version of you. So once I understood that I was highly sensitive, I brought one of Dr. Aron's assessments into a group of 25 women entrepreneurs that I was working with in person at the time, had them take the assessment, and lo and behold, every single woman in that room was also highly sensitive. And that's when it really occurred to me that something very, very important was happening here. And that here was a room of absolutely talented women. And when they all learned they were highly sensitive, not one woman in that room wanted to be highly sensitive. They really saw it as a weakness, as a detriment, as a negative label. And that's when I knew that it was really, really important that there be a specific way for those of us who are highly sensitive, are extremely talented, do feel called to be self-employed, that we are equipped to be able to bring the gifts that we have out into the world through our business in a way that is really energizing and supportive to who we are and how we're wired, rather than working against us.
Yeah, I love that. It's making me think as we talk. I have 5 little ones. They're not that little anymore. My youngest is 7 and my oldest is 15. And one of them, my third son, Lincoln, is, I don't think I've had like a word to describe, but it's exactly that. Like, he is a highly sensitive child. He's super bright. He's super fun. He's really funny, but life is intense for him. Like,
Yes.
and it's little things. It's like, if sounds are loud for us, like for me, they're really loud for him.
Right.
If light is bright for me, it's really bright for him.
Exactly.
The other kids, I can pick up and grab them and tickle them, and I can do the same thing with him. But when I do, it's like overwhelming, reaction, and there's just like a stimulus inside of him that is intensified compared
That's right.
to the rest of the kids. And it's just so interesting because that is his life experience.
Yes,
And there's a word
absolutely. I
for
mean,
it.
you really just described it so well. And it makes sense, right? Like, you have 5 kids, and so one of them is highly sensitive. That is that 20%. And again, absolutely. And it's a really tough place to be when you don't understand that your nervous system is wired differently. And, most of the entrepreneurs, the HSEs that I mentor, have gone the majority of their life completely unaware that they're highly sensitive, and definitely not having any guidance on how to really be able to work with this aspect of themselves. So what's developed over time is a real sense of being less than, or just at least a sense of being different, which perhaps your little one experiences. And, that can really be troubling. But truly, what comes with being highly sensitive are also all of these really amazing, significant traits. And in my work, I refer to them as HSE strengths. And so what you've already described about your little one, right, is that he's creative, he has a great sense of humor, he's funny. Those are some real specific attributes to strengths of being highly sensitive. So it becomes about learning how to have your highly sensitive nature work for you as a strength in your business, rather than against you as a shadow.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I don't want to focus on the children too much, but I'm going to, just to steal your knowledge a little bit. I want to talk about business
Yes.
primarily, but I'm thinking about Lincoln specifically. And, the tough thing is for him, and I imagine this is true for adults too, is I'll see this with his siblings where they'll be like, Lincoln, like, why are you so sensitive? Like, what's the problem? Like, it's not that big a deal. It's not that loud. It's not that whatever. And he's like, and he really doesn't understand it. And I'm curious, first of all, like, does the research say that people are born with it, or can they adjust to it? And I'll tell you why, and this is probably too much info for a podcast, but I'll get it out anyway. He had a pretty serious trauma when he was about 2 years old. He
Yes.
broke his femur, ironically, just running down a sidewalk, which is crazy. That's a whole other story. But he broke his femur. He was in a full body cast for quite a while. And before that, he was a very wild, rambunctious child. And after that, we felt like, or thought that was kind of a trigger for him that kind of pushed him into this more sensitive nature. Like, what does the research say about stuff like that? Is it trauma induced? Is it just born in? Is it going to be both?
Yes, I so appreciate this question, because it absolutely, plays a part when you are starting into being self-employed. So the research, according to Dr. Aaron, is you are born into the world this way. So I always like to say, like, your parents didn't do it to you, and you didn't pick it up on the playground, and it's not because of that weird drink you had in college. It's literally how you came into the world. However, the trauma piece is really interesting, because also in Dr. Aaron's work, what she emphasizes is that trauma did not create the highly sensitive. However, how the trauma occurs will impact the highly sensitive and their reaction to trauma, and then therefore similar trauma as they go throughout their life. So the trauma will enhance the qualities of being highly sensitive. So that perhaps is what you saw, and again, he was at such a young age and developmentally changing. I'm an educator, so I'm like speaking from that as well. That 2-year-old period, so probably what you saw was he was always highly sensitive. You didn't necessarily really notice it, as a baby and becoming a toddler, but then the trauma really heightened the highly sensitive experience for him, most likely.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, before I turn it into a podcast, let's talk about, a podcast about family and parenting. Let me talk about business.
Yeah.
So from an entrepreneur's perspective, one of the things I always say on this show is I want to give people stories, tips, and ideas to help them build a business without being worn out, stressed out, and ready to quit.
Yes.
I would imagine, first of all, everybody at some point feels that way. So if you're listening to the show and you're going, well, that's exactly how I feel. Look, I've been in business for over 20 years, and there have been days in the last couple of weeks where I have felt like that.
Yes.
Because it's just the nature of life and the cycle of business. It just changes. But I would imagine that some of those same feelings that everybody has could be intensified for somebody who's highly sensitive, especially if they don't understand how to use that as a strength versus it pulling them down. So what are some real strategies that people can use if they're listening to this going, gosh, that kind of sounds like me. That's how I feel. That's how I think. What are some real things that they can do in their entrepreneurial journey to help them manage their business better and turn this into a strength?
For sure. Absolutely. Well, first and foremost is just to acknowledge and begin to work with the idea that there is nothing wrong with you. And that is really important, because the fact that we are 20% versus the other 80%, as I mentioned earlier, we have grown up with some sense of, even if it's unconscious, some sense of being different. And often the mind equates that with being wrong. And that is not true. Different is different. It is not wrong. So there's nothing wrong with you. That's number one, to really begin to work with that concept as a truth. From there is, I always say that for an HSE, business is an inner and outer process. And that is really important and significant as well, because most business training that's developed and designed for the other 80%, as I lovingly like to call them, is primarily outer focused. It's really about, just what outer actions you're going to take when it comes to marketing, when it comes to sales, when it comes to operations. For those of us who are highly sensitive, there is not compartmentalization. Because our nervous system takes in stimulation, no matter where it's coming from, there's going to be an interweaving, if you will. It's a whole business is a holistic experience. So you want to have tools and techniques in place that help you and support you with the inner process of business just as much as the outer process. So, for example, one of the primary teachings that I share in all of my Business Miracles mentoring programs is a process that I call energy management. And there's different tools within energy management, but the idea is that you are taking time every day to really set your energy, set your mindset for the day. And what that does is it supports you in being able to be proactive with working with your nervous system, rather than what happens for most highly sensitives who are just simply untrained, is you have the experience of like the world and then therefore your business happening to you. So you're constantly in reactive mode. Energy management puts you in a proactive position. And then from there is really to approach those outer actions from a way where you're willing to take those actions differently than the other 80% takes them. So for example, I have a very specific selling process that I teach that is designed to work for those of us who are highly sensitive. And it's very different than what's taught by a lot of, again, the other 80%. So you have to be willing to absolutely, you still have to market, you still have to sell, you still have to set up systems within operations, but to begin to do it in a way that matches your nature rather than has your nature working against you.
Yeah, this is really good. It makes me think about, we do a lot of work with our team with personality profiles of all different types,
I do too. Yes.
DISC profile and Enneagram and all those different kinds of things. Um, but this is like another layer almost on top of that, kind of is kind of how I see it. And it's making me think about my own team, for example. I have almost 20 team members. And so if I have 20 team members, then, if the statistics match with my team, 3 or 4 of them probably fall into this category most likely. And so, we talked a little bit about that entrepreneur and their own kind of self, but there is a big audience listening to the podcast, and that means the other 80% that aren't highly sensitive might be going, well, that's not me. But what I'm thinking in this is going, well, hold on, who's around me? Now, obviously, I've already said one of my children, so that's a big deal. But now I have a whole team around me who all have different strengths and abilities. So maybe speak to me, like I'm not a highly sensitive person, but I have people around me who are. How can I learn to work with those people well, and how can I lead them well in my scenario so that I'm helping draw out their strengths? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It really makes sense. And it's such a valuable question. And my personal belief is that, the more business owners that start to have this conversation, and I would say, business owners, corporations, organizations, associations that start to have this conversation, there will be like such an increase of productivity, first and foremost. And secondly, there will be such an increase of a sense of harmony and fulfillment within the workplace. So the first and most important part of the answer to that question is what you've already started to tap into. And that is the willingness to recognize that not everyone on your team is like you. That is number one. And number two, to be okay with the fact that not everyone on your team is like you. And specifically, what we're talking about when we're talking about not like you, what we're talking about, the difference is we're talking about how the person processes. So a highly sensitive processes the world differently than someone who is not. And again, your son Lincoln is a fantastic example. And so when you learn that you have highly sensitives on your team, then you can really begin to work with the fact that they process differently. That does not in any way mean that they get enabled, that they get singled out, that exceptions are made for them. But more so, it just means that there can be the willingness to have a holistic approach, say to meetings, to different types of strategies, projects, and that you can really tap into the highly sensitive's strengths in specific ways. And when you really do that and not just trying to force the highly sensitive to process the way a non-highly sensitive does, they will add so much. Because some of our strengths, particularly, again, the work that I do is for entrepreneurs, but it's across the board for those of us who are highly sensitive. The strengths are we are extremely intuitive. Absolutely. We are massively empathic. We are excellent deep listeners. We are deep thinkers. We are deep feelers. We are excellent with language. These are just some of our strengths. And so perhaps even as you're hearing that, or anyone who's listening, you start to think of, wow, if I really let someone go to work from that place, then what could be done, at a much, again, higher level of productivity than the way that we're working now.
Yeah, I mean, I both at work with my team and just in general in life, like there are all these people that pop into mind, and I almost have different groups of people. I have some that they are completely unsensitive, but which might be a different situation, and then I have some who like fall exactly into that category. And as you're listing those strengths, I'm going, yep, that's that person. Yep, that's that person. Yep, that's who they are.
Yes.
And I kind of see this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I kind of see this similar to how we like see personality profiles internally when we talk about them. So like the DISC profile is one that we use a lot internally. And in that profile, there's 4 different types, a D, an I, an S, and a C. And the D and the C are basically in opposition to one another to some extent, in that the D is a hard driver. They're like, let's get the job done. Let's do it right now. And the C is a hold on, let's think about it. Let's go through the details. Let's make sure we get it all right. And so there's a lot of tension that can be created there. But if those personalities are lined up well, they actually are exceptionally powerful. And the example that I always give is a kite and a string. If a kite had no string, it would just fly out into the air and have no purpose or design. But with the string, it holds it back just enough that it's able to actually create the tension that it needs.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking about, it's a long way around to get to where I'm going, which is with personality profiles, what we always say is, just because I'm a high D does not mean that I have the right to railroad someone else because I'm like, well, that's just my personality. In the same way that somebody else who's a high C does not have the right to be like, well, I'm just a high C, so I expect you to give me every single possible detail. And I kind of see that like this. It's a balance of self-awareness of the individual who is highly sensitive to go, hey, yeah, oh, that is me. Hey, these are my strengths. How can I double down on those? And awareness of the other people on the team to go, oh, this is like a special trait that they have that I need to be aware of, and it's moving towards each other. Does that kind of sound right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, for my team, we work with a lot of different types of personality tools as well. The uniqueness about my team is that the majority of us are highly sensitive. So we actually flip the stats where 20% of my team is not highly sensitive and 80% is. And so that just, is an interesting and fascinating factor. But we still have to be that kite and be that string for sure. And so it does require absolutely a high level of personal responsibility, but particularly for those of us who are leaders, right, who are leaders of the team, it really does fall on us to be setting up systems, as it sounds like, you have for yourself, that incorporates the willingness to work with those differences and a level of acceptance. And the highly sensitive is just probably, I would look at it as like a next layer or a deeper layer to a lot of like the personality types and tools that you're speaking about. Mm-hmm.
That makes a lot of sense. What I'd love to do is think about, we've talked a lot about the highly sensitive characteristics. And I think that's really important because it's such a unique topic that I've never dealt with on the show and I've never even really heard of specifically. So I'm really enjoying that. But I want to back up a little bit and think about your entrepreneurial journey as a whole. Like you said earlier, you had been an entrepreneur for 16 years. You finally got the business to $1 million, but then you kind of struggled with that. I think in a lot of people's heads, they think, if I can just hit this particular mark, everything's going to be fine. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, because I always like to draw out those struggles a little bit, because I think when other people listen to this, they go, there's this a sense of relief in realizing, hey, other people are trying to figure this out too. And it's possible to get out of those dark days and get to a place of relief. And for you, that was a lot around figuring out who you were and what your unique gifts and strengths are. But kind of how did you get to that point where you kind of realized those things, and what allowed you to kind of dig out of that place that you felt you were in?
Yes, for sure. I do think it's such an important conversation to have, which is, why I love your podcast. I mean, it's just, everyone would benefit the more that there would just, be a willingness to talk about, what's working, what's not working, how to get through it. So absolutely, as I said, I was self-employed for, just under 10 years. More like around seventh, eighth year mark, and had brought my business across $1 million mark, and definitely had been in the misconception of exactly what it is that you're describing, right? Which is that, all of the angst of being an entrepreneur will go away if I just hit this certain income level. Mm-hmm. And that is the biggest myth ever. So if I can emphasize one thing, and it has nothing to do with the amount of income or not amount of income, that's not it at all. It's more the heart of the myth, because being an entrepreneur is, as you were describing earlier, it is actually meant to be a process of consistent evolution. So there is no end goal. And it's one of the things that I refer to in my teachings from years ago, which I call the myth of arrival. There is no arrival. And there is no point when, again, all of the angst or the learning that is involved with being an entrepreneur goes away. It changes through your willingness to be excited by every learning opportunity. And then you build muscles that allow you to be more equipped, but it never goes away. And in truth, you actually don't want it to go away, because that's part of the reason, whether you're aware of it or not, that brought you to be an entrepreneur. And definitely, again, for those of us who are highly sensitive. So for myself, I was, being coached by a lot of people who really were towing the line, that it was about that income. And I just didn't know anything different. I mean, I left a career as a high school teacher and began a business. So I was in a whole new world, a whole new experience for myself. And again, at that point, I didn't understand and know that I was highly sensitive. I would say what got me through that dark night was my drive to understand what had happened. I did, as I mentioned earlier, go into a space of deep self-inquiry, all because that is something that I am always passionate about, which is to be on a path of self-growth, which is another thing I say all the time, is if you want a fast track to personal growth, start a business. Because it will bring all of your stuff right up and give you the opportunity to work with it. So that is really what I did. I literally withdrew from everything. I stopped attending trainings. I took myself offline. I continued to pour my love and service into the clients that I was working with at the time. But other than that, I went into a very, very deep place. And as I said, then I learned that I was highly sensitive. So what that really gave me was this new level and layer about who I am in myself as a person. And I really believe that that's the secret to success for every entrepreneur, is to really know yourself, know who you are, and know how you work best, and be willing to accept the gift that entrepreneurialism gives, which is that you get to design your day-to-day around who you are and how it is that you work best. And that is what I did. So my success for myself is not that I brought my business across $1 million mark. My success for me, is that I've maintained $1 million business, but now I am, the steward of $1 million mission and movement that allows me to literally live every day in a way that really feeds who I am. And that includes being highly sensitive. And I literally am like on my knees grateful every single day that I get to do that. So,
and that's an awesome feeling, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. So no dollar amount will give that to you, but that's the right. Journey will.
It's so interesting because as you're saying all this, I'm thinking through a lot of stuff that I will say sometimes and realizing just where I'm missing. One of the things I always say is that I think that most entrepreneurs who really have the calling, and I do believe it is a calling, and really have the drive to get it done, I think that most of them can wing it to about 8 or 10 people and about $1 million. But after that, what I always used to say was that they need specific systems and processes to get them to the next level. But what I'm realizing, this is my self-awareness moment for the show. What I'm realizing in this conversation is that's what I needed. Like what I needed to get past where we were
Right.
was improved systems and processes, because that's a big weakness for me. Because I'm such a driver, I don't care about the details a lot of times. And as a result, I can miss things. And that was causing problems because me missing things was just filtering down to the rest of the team.
Sure. Yes.
But what I actually think the root is, like, and this has kind of been, it's resonating because it is related to a lot of other conversations I've had lately with other people, is like the superpower really is self-awareness.
Yes.
And it's understanding that for me, it was systems and processes. It was needing to put the right people around me, because I wasn't going to change my behavior with regards to some of these traits. There are some
Right.
things about me, they're just the way that I am. And I can leverage my own strengths of, you know, that driver personality, and also put the right people around me and the right systems around me to kind of compensate for that about the details and everything else.
Right.
But it really is self-awareness. So what led you to, you know, when you found that research and you kind of like had this revelation, what led you to that? Like, how did you get there from where you were?
To get to the realization, you mean?
About what it meant to be highly sensitive. Yeah.
Yeah, well, again, I was, in that space of deep inquiry. And so I was open to, support and insight wherever it is that I could get it. And when I connected with Dr. Erin and realized through her work that I was highly sensitive, it was like all of these pieces just clicked into place. I was like, it was kind of like Lincoln, right? I was like, oh, that's why I don't like being tickled. Like, oh, like that's why I don't want to be in the front row at a rock concert. Oh, like, like,
Right.
and I was like, oh, that's why marketing this way doesn't work for me. Like, that's why I just really, I got the job done, but it came at a really high cost.
Yeah.
So once I had those realizations, and then, like I said, I realized that so many of the women that I was coaching at the time were also highly sensitive. I was like, okay, we really need to go about this differently. And in that way, there's absolutely the possibility and potential for, solid, sustainable success. And it really shifted everything, because everything, and especially at that time that, was being taught and that was on the internet, it was all geared, towards the hustle and towards, maximizing the internet. And those are never things that have inspired me. Never, really been the drive for me. I could do it, and I did, but like I said, it came at a cost, which even that led to one of my core teachings, which is about the HSE coping mechanism. And there's 3 coping mechanisms that I've identified. You're either a pusher, a hider, or a combo platter. And you will get through life with those coping mechanisms. But if you're really interested in being a successful entrepreneur, you have to learn how to go beyond coping and just getting through life and into creating, because that's the act and art of being an entrepreneur. So, that was kind of the uncorking, if you will, the opening, and really beginning to develop and really create what has now become a great body of work in service to highly sensitive entrepreneurs.
Well, I'm really excited about this because I think that there are a lot of people listening, 20% of them, that are going, oh, that's me. And my hope is that the other 80% are going, hey, I know somebody like that. Maybe I can either connect them with you or your teaching, or just learn more about what that means and kind of work towards that person.
That's right.
It's really cool. 2 things I like to kind of wrap up with, although we probably could talk about this all day, which I love, is this. I always love to talk about the question of work-life balance. It means something different to everyone, but I like to go there a lot because it's really important to me. And it's my show, so I get to ask the questions. And so when you hear the word, first of all, when you hear the phrase work-life balance, number one, what does that mean to you? And based on like what it means to you, how have you learned over time to kind of put your life in a place that you go, hey, I'm really happy with where things are? What does that look like?
Yes. Passionate about this question. So what it means to me, it goes back to knowing yourself, right? So work-life balance looks and feels different for every person. And, that is, again, so much at the heart of what I teach. I don't have just one formula that I say, oh, if you're an HSE, this is how you have to do everything in your business, including work-life balance.
Mm.
But what I teach is a process of understanding and knowing yourself, and then teachings and tools that you can use to set up your business to match who you are. And that includes work-life balance. So two key teachings that come to mind that I share is, one is I call the 1/3 rule, which is basically dividing your time into what I refer to as time off, time on, and time in, which helps you understand that a balance actually is needed. That you're not meant to be working in your business all the time or on your business all the time, but you actually need to balance between those two, and then absolutely that time and space for time off. And then there is also the teaching that I share at a particular level of mentoring, which is, what is your core motivational value? Is it time? Is it energy? Or is it money? And that teaching really came out of, again, my own experience of learning that I'm highly sensitive, where all of the business training I had received up until that point assumed that my motivational value as an entrepreneur was money.
Mm.
And for HSEs, it varies. And that motivational value will change over time as you evolve into different phases of your business. But when you get very clear about which motivational value you are meant to lead with, it shifts everything. And it really makes a difference in terms of what that work-life balance is meant to look like for you. And again, at a particular time in your life. So as I shared earlier, I have designed my life to really support who I am. So I feel very balanced.
That's great. And I think a lot of people may be listening going, oh, I wish I felt like that. Some days I still do. But it is all about that. I mean, being an entrepreneur is a lot about crafting the life that you want. And for some people, like, the example a lot of people use on the hustle side is somebody like Gary Vaynerchuk in the social media world. And he's the 24/7 hustle, 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 hustle. But even he will say, if you ask him, he will say, look, if that's not for you, that's okay. Like, you do you, just don't complain about it. He's like, if what you're doing is not producing the results and you're complaining about it, that's a different thing.
That's right.
But knowing yourself, number one, like you said, is really important. And the other thing that you kind of mentioned as well, is kind of the timing, or what I will say is like the season of life.
Yes.
Because when I was younger and did not have 5 children and wasn't married, I love work. Like, I like the work I do.
Right.
So there's nothing wrong with being in a certain season and working 18 hours a day. That's fine.
Totally.
If that's where you're at, that's okay.
Yeah.
And I think our society is guilting people in both directions.
Agreed.
We're guilting people because they're not working enough. And now I think the new trend now is guilting them because they're working too much.
Agreed.
And at some point, I think we have to, as human beings, go, hey, what do you need?
That's right.
What does your
Absolutely.
life look like? And then decide what that is, because right now in my season of where I am with my kids, where they're at, my marriage and everything else, I am doing my absolute best to not work past a certain time. One of my core, like, kind of values as a person right now is to eat dinner with my family.
Right.
And so if anything conflicts with that argument, it better be a big deal, and it better have already been approved by my wife.
That's right. I love it.
That's for me. But for somebody else, they might want to work through dinner every single night. That's fine. So I just love,
Right.
I love how you put that. And I love the idea behind core motivations of time, energy, and money. And the idea of being off, on, and in. I think those are really, really helpful. So like I said, we could go on all day, but I would like to give people an opportunity to find more about you and what you do and your training and teaching, because I think it's really unique. I've studied a lot of stuff in business over a lot of time, and I've never come across this. So I'm super interested. Where can I and other people like me who want to know more find out more about you and what you teach?
Absolutely. So I would say probably the best place to start is if you've been listening and you have an inkling like, oh, this might be me, or as you mentioned earlier, Jay, oh, this might be so-and-so who's on my team or I'm married to or what have you, I recommend that you start by taking the Highly Sensitive Entrepreneur Assessment, and you can find that at hsequiz.com, hsequiz.com. But like I said, it's really an assessment, not a quiz, because there's no pass or fail. So at the end of that assessment, you will find out if you are either somewhat of an HSE, or if you are a super HSE, or if you are like me, you are a super uber HSE. And then depending on where you fall in the spectrum, you'll receive a tailored success guide to support you with information about how to really begin working with this aspect of yourself, or again, someone who's important to you. So hsequiz.com is a great place to get started.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that. I will put that link in the show notes for people to click on if they want to and go check it out. So go get your free assessment. It's hsequiz.com. You just need your name and email address, and you can take that assessment. Heather, thank you so much for being on the show today. This has been really insightful and really helpful. I think it's going to be valuable for me, my team, and my life. So selfishly, I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you. I've loved this conversation. Really appreciated it, Jay.
Thanks. Hey, I hope this video has helped you with some tips and ideas to build a business that lasts. Make sure you subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss out on the next videos that we roll out. And more importantly, for some awesome free resources, head over to our website at buildingabusinessthatlasts.com. You can get a free copy of my book there, where I tell you how I have built an agency that's grown year over year for the last 20 years in a row. So go grab that, buildingabusinessthatlasts.com, and make sure to subscribe to our channel. Thanks. We'll see you soon.